Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of True Scary Stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be reading true animal encounter horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. So without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true scary stories. My grandpa and his hunting buddy were out moose hunting years ago, when my mom was still a kid. They were about an hour into a hike, looking for a big bull, when they decided to split up to cover more ground. My grandpa, after about 15 to 20 of walking through dense bush, came into a small clearing of trees, and a mama grizzly bear and her two cubs. Almost instinctively, my grandpa scrambled up the closest tree, just out of the angry mama bear's reach, even kicking at her snout a few times. After circling and scratching at the tree he's in, mama bear ambles off into the brush, her cubs right behind her. When he thinks he's in the clear, he starts climbing down, but a crashing from the same bushes mama bear walked into makes him go straight back up the tree. She must have seen him trying to climb down, because she charged right back at him, now furiously snapping at his feet and shaking the tree. Again, after circling the tree and growling up a storm, she leaves a second time. And again, my grandpa waits, but a little longer this time. He manages to carefully make his way down and sort of speed walks in the direction where he and his buddy parked their truck. Mama bear had definitely been watching, because as soon as he was almost out of the clearing, she came charging out once more. He quickly shot up another tree, this time a little higher up than his previous safe spot. After a good long while of her snarling, shaking, and scratching the tree, and overall just terrorizing my grandpa, she left, this time a little faster. My grandpa was in that tree for what seemed like an hour, listening carefully for any movement. But after about half an hour, he slowly made his way down the tree, pausing every so often to make sure that mama bear wasn't peeking over the brush waiting for him. After making it to the ground and checking to see if the coast was clear, my grandpa made a quick but quiet getaway back to the truck, where his hunting buddy was waiting, equally empty-handed. When questioned why he didn't bring anything back, my grandpa explained that he just had a run-in with the world's most persistent mother bear, and that was explanation enough. This time last year, I was on a night hike with a UV light, looking for scorpions, and was stalked by a mountain lion. There were 3 of us and a little dog. While in the caboose position, I took a glance behind me and saw something jump off the trail and into the scrub/cacti. It was tough to convince everyone else, but finally the middle person saw my headlamp illuminate its back and tail. Now everyone is confident that we're being stalked. We keep close, and I'm walking backwards in the rear as we approach a trailhead parking lot area. Person in front taps the only occupied car's window and requests that the driver reposition and turn on his headlights. He complies, and then we all saw a fully grown panther about 20 foot off the side of the trail. It knew it was spotted and ran. I'm pretty sure that it was going for the little dog, but it's concerning that he stalked us for like a quarter of a mile in the middle of the night. Been doing less scorpion hunts since then, but I still get out plenty. Things are just a little bit more tense and observant now. Hiking early morning in Hawaii, and my stomach notifies me that it's time to go. I find a porta potty near the trailhead and jump and do my business. Once complete, I flipped my headlamp on to find the toilet paper, but instead find a huge 5-inch in diameter banana spider hanging out in the corner of the porta potty. Trying not to spook it, I slowly reach for the 1-ply. As I do, my headlamp shines on this monster, and it proceeds to freak out. It runs in circles for a bit, both of us losing our minds at this point, and ends up between my legs inside of my underwear. I'm at a complete loss for what to do, but eventually begin wiggling back and forth in an attempt to get this spider to remove itself. That didn't work at all. Instead of exiting the premises, this thing runs up my leg. This is the point where I give up and storm out of the porta potty yelling and screaming, pants around my ankles. No clue what to do to that spider, but it disappeared in a flash, just like my dignity. I'm not a hiker, but I trail rode horses for 15 years growing up. I'll keep this relatively short and succinct because I'd rather not relive the whole thing. I was in the Rockies with my dad one summer vacation when I was 14, and a family of 4 was hiking ahead of us on the trail. They had a good head start. Kids petted our horses before they left the trailhead as we were saddling up. Came on 3 of them just before a bend. We stopped and chatted and asked where the 10-year-old boy was. They said that he was around the bend checking something out. I rode a bit ahead around the bend and found a mountain lion on the trail. It was standing above the boy, blood everywhere. My dad charged his horse at the mountain lion, pulled the revolver that he always carried while we were on the trail, and shot in the air. Gutsiest thing I've ever seen. The lion ran pretty fast into the woods. Dad fired 2 after it after he had passed the boy, then turned around and jumped off to see to the kid. I came up since my saddlebags had the first aid kit that we carried. The kid was still alive, but my dad had his hand over the kid's throat. Blood was everywhere. The father of the family came around the corner to see what the gunshots were about and saw the boy. There was a lot of yelling, but I don't really remember what was said. I was locked up on my horse. I was a Boy Scout and had first aid training, but I was just frozen there. I don't remember thinking much of anything. I was just in shock. I don't really want to type out the rest, but the younger boy didn't make it. The mountain lion was hunted down by park rangers days later. Found out that it was pregnant and starving, which is why it likely was inclined to target a human. I tell this story here as a warning to any hikers, bikers, or whoever goes out into the woods, especially in places with a higher population of predatory animals like the Rockies. Stay together. Stay armed, with gun, mace, both, or whatever. Stay informed of the dangers. Listen to the rangers and their warnings. Prepare. Take precautions. And for God's sake, don't go by yourself. So me and a friend were out late one night, probably around 10 p.m. or so, and we were chasing the sound of coyotes on the back end of my property. We had a suppressed .22, and we were going to see if we could catch one with that and hopefully drive the pack away from my chickens. Well, we found a nesting spot for a group of deer when we were making our way to the back of the property. If you haven't seen this, it's basically just a flat spot and a patch of grass, or sometimes in the woods, and in this case a tall patch of grass. Well, anyway, we're coming up past this spot that we saw a nesting area, and we see this beautiful buck. It's not hunting season, and we're not equipped to deal with it even if it was, in addition to the fact that it was nighttime. So we just take the opportunity to enjoy looking at this beautiful 6 to 8 point buck when he turns and looks at us. Now, we're probably 75 yards away from him looking over tall grass, coming through what is probably his nesting spot, or the nesting spot for some of his doe. Now, it's not like he's going to be protective over the spot or anything. We actually expected him to take off and run as soon as he noticed us, but he hadn't. Instead, this 5.5-foot tall, probably 200-pound specimen of a buck starts stamping in front and back feet alternatively. He's making this crazy wheezing noise like a person breathing through a plastic tube. It's pretty unsettling. I've never seen an animal act this way, let alone a deer. Compound that with the fact that me and my friend are out here in the dark, so we just sit there and watch. I've got the gun ready, but I have no expectation of needing it. I figure this buck is just acting funny. It's really early in the rut. He's probably just got his Jones going a little bit too hard, so it's not that big of a deal. Until the thing starts spinning. Just hold on, full spinning in a circle. And then I swear to God, there's no making this up from the thing starts laughing. Not wheezing, not coughing like a man. He laughs, full on laughing. A clear, chuckling laugh, like a person standing behind the deer and laughing, but it's coming from the deer. Then this thing stands up on 2 feet and bounces through the grass towards the wood lines, and we never see it again, clearing a 4-foot fence in the process. I'm from Florida, and I was volunteering at a local nature conservancy. One of our tasks was to remove fallen logs that were blocking up a creek after a big storm. The creek was about chest deep, 15 feet wide, and opaque brown. Many Florida freshwater bays are brown because of tannins leached into the river from trees. As I'm moving logs, I notice a roughly 12-foot alligator on the embankment that I hadn't noticed before. It then slid into the creek that I was in. I was with a land manager who was moving logs with me, and a herpetologist who was in the canoe. I asked them what to do and they responded, well, those logs ain't gonna move themselves, and that gator's probably just trying to get away from us. Still, spending 30 minutes in a creek that you can't see anything, knowing that there's an alligator lurking near your feet, moving logs which look like alligators, was one of the most nerve-wracking things I've ever done. I've been woken up by a bear sniffing my head once. I was cowboy camping with no tent in Lyell Canyon in Yosemite once, when I hear something sniff right next to my head. My sleep-addled brain thinks it's a ranger on a horse telling me to move my camp. I had hiked about 20 miles that day. You have to be at least 4 miles into the canyon to camp, and I wasn't 100% sure that I'd made it far enough, since it was dark when I set up camp. Anyways, I say just 1 second, set up, grab around for my flashlight, and turn it on to see a black bear a couple of feet away. I holler. He tears off. I get out and empty my bladder, and try to fall back asleep until I hear him coming around again. I make a bunch more noise, decide that I'm not getting any more sleep, break camp, and slowly night hike until the sun rises. At the time of this story, I was working until 1 a.m., so I wouldn't get home until 2 or so. I opened the door to the house and felt what I thought was a breeze come by my leg. I don't really pay attention. Walk over to my desk, put my keys down and turn the light on. Right when I do so, there are 2 possums in the act of mating in the middle of my kitchen. They screamed. I screamed, and we began the 3-hour dance of getting them out of my house. I ended up trapping them in a dog cage and dumping them out in the middle of my backyard. I almost petted a possum on accident. I stepped out onto the back porch one night to get some air. The lights were out, but I saw the distinctive white blob of fur that I assumed was my cat, Frank. I went down to pet him, and he looked up at me, at which point I noticed that his face got a lot longer, and his eyes got a lot beadier. Well, it wasn't Frank. I locked eyes with this possum, my hand about 3 inches away from its face. We both froze. Then it took off running into the yard and crashed into the back fence. I was so sure that I was about to lose a finger or two. When I was young, I went fishing with my dad and my best friend. We waded out through some deeper water to reach the shallow sandbar, where we fished for quite a while. The tide came in, and the water that had been just above my ankles was now above my waist. Suddenly, a large shark about 7 to 8 feet long crashed through a school of mullet only a few feet away from me. My dad saw it. My best friend saw it. And for a second, we all three just kind of froze with our mouths hanging wide open. Quietly and calmly, my dad told us to walk back to shore, splashing as little as possible. We did, but the tide had come in, and I wasn't as tall as the other two guys. The deeper water between the sandbar and shore reached their chests, but I could hardly keep my head above the water, while my feet barely bounced along the bottom, and I struggled to hold my fishing rod up out of the water. I was completely helpless, while we knew that a hungry shark was swimming somewhere in the area. It felt like a scene out of a nightmare, trying to run from an invisible monster, but my feet could barely touch the ground, and I was hardly moving. I know, and even knew in that moment, that I had little chance of being eaten by a shark, especially one who was focused on fish. Still, if I ever were to be attacked, that was the moment, and I was utterly defenseless. A few years later, a man was killed just a few miles away when he jumped off of his dock and into the path of a large bull shark that was chasing a mullet. I was very drunk at a wedding on a large property in rural New South Wales. I like to wander and explore when I drink. I was alone and suddenly confronted with a wombat. Wombats are massive balls of muscle. Being the drunk idiot I was all like, "Aw, hello me wombat," and began to approach it. The wombat did not like this. It charged me. It was so fast. My heart stopped and I turned and ran as fast as I could. The little bugger nearly caught me. I sprinted back to the wedding in fear for my life. I was stationed in Japan for 3 out of the 6 years that I was in the Navy. During that time, I leased a Japanese house, and the shower was its own room. Fully walk-in with a tub, bench, etc. It was amazing. So as the post says, I stumble into the shower one morning still half asleep, and out of my peripherals, I see a black flash from behind me and hear a thud. I look into the tub and there's a huntsman spider the size of my hand staring back at me. Holy cow. My best guess is it was on the wall behind me and got scared when I walked in. So I go into attack mode immediately, grab the shower head which was on the hose, take aim looking to drown this thing in the tub drain, and as soon as I turned the water on, it jumped out of the tub onto the wall and ran into the windowsill. The tactic then became opening the window fast and pinching to death in the sill. As soon as I touched the glass, it jumped out onto the wall again and ran out the shower door. Now I'm cornered in the shower, peering out into the powder room to see the huntsman on the cabinet door waiting for me. I sneak to the front door of the house and grab a flip-flop, come back to the powder room and wing the flip-flop at the spider. Hit it, wound several of the legs, but do not kill it. It runs out of the bathroom and underneath the stairs, much slower than it was moving prior. Feeling confident that spider is cornered under the stairs, I grab a can of bug spray and move in to finish it. Looking closely under the stairs, it was a hollow staircase where you could see through the gaps between the steps. I see a black tail curdled over the back lip of one of the stairs, and assume that it's the spider hiding on the back of the step. I hit it with the spray. Enter Mucade Centipede. It dropped off the back of the stair and started charging at me. I immediately peed a little. The front half of its body was up off the floor, and its mouth was visibly biting. It backed me up all the way to the front door as I emptied the entire can of bug spray on it. By the time we got to the door, it was obviously overcome by the chemicals and just writhing around. So I grabbed the other flip-flop and smashed it. It didn't work. I hit it a few times and it would not die. So I turned the flip-flop on his edge and used it like a saw to cut the thing in half. Then I remembered the spider. It was still under the stairs. So I blew under there and it ran out wounded, and I smashed it with the flip-flop saw. Then I screamed at the top of my lungs for 30 seconds. The whole battle took probably 3 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. I think being naked caused an adrenaline rush 1,000 times greater than if I were fully clothed. When I got to work, I was frazzled enough for my coworkers to notice. Can't tell if it was the worst morning of my life or my biggest triumph, but man won that day. I was cycling up a mountain in the Scottish Highlands. My gran lives there. And as I went around a corner, I came face to face with a huge Highland cow, which was running down the mountain the opposite way. Instead of jumping off the path, I thought the cow would be friendly and edge over to let me by. Big mistake. It threw its head as I went by, almost impaling me and throwing me off the path into a 20-foot tumble down the mountain. I outran a swarm of bees. I was young and in Straya, and we lived on the front of a farm. I went exploring a lot. It was really cool. I found a bee's nest in a huge fallen tree. I had watched a lot of cartoons and wanted to know if the bees would come out in an arrow and get me if I whacked it with a stick. So I did. They did not. I was disappointed and climbed around the fallen tree. The bees do attack, just not immediately, and not in an arrow, in a cloud. Suddenly, they were all around me. I sprinted home, about 2 kilometers, and if I slowed down, the bees caught up. I ran into our yard and shut the gate thinking I was safe. I obviously wasn't and got stung a few times. I deserved it though. Please, don't go beating up animal homes. I was solo hiking in the Porcupine Mountains in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan last autumn. Although I was by myself, there were plenty of other backpackers up there those couple of days. I ran across a bear print in the trail one morning. A few hours later, I rounded a corner of the trail, and about 70 foot up ahead, I saw the hindquarters of an animal with dark brown fur about 2 feet high. I got a surge of adrenaline, and everything started going in slow motion. I started to panic, and just as the poop was about to leave me, the animal lifted its head and it ended up being a black Labrador retriever. Right as I catch my breath, the dog's owner came rounding the corner from the opposite direction and sees me clutching my chest. I'm Australian, so I'm taking my life in my own hands by even walking out the door on most days. However, between the tiger snake that sat up and flared its head like a cobra and then spat at my face when I was 12, and the angry koala that made me climb the bonnet of my car when I was 32, the koala is the most scary. Scene: late night, back dirt road, with a steep drop on one side, mountain wall on the other. Big fat koala in the middle of the road, scratching its butt with one death claw, while the other shoved leaves into its mouth and glared at me with its beady eyes as it willfully ignored my horn. I was tired and grumpy, so I got out and started yelling at it and flapping my arms. Big mistake. The thing growled and lunged towards me. Now, koala arms are bigger than you realize, and they are tipped with death claws that can plunge into hard wood. So I ran back to my car, but wasn't going to make the door. Instead, I lunged at the bull bar and climbed onto the bonnet. Death Claws McGee followed, swinging up like a monkey, still growling like the spawn of Satan's most STD-ridden teddy. I scrambled backwards and up the windscreen, drawing my legs back just in time to see the claws scratching down my windshield. Luckily, they couldn't grip. Scream growling in frustration, the fat, fluffy terror sat on my bonnet and hooked both windshield wipers back and out while it grumbled and grunted not 4 feet below me. Needless to say, I escaped. A passing milk tanker stopped, and the guy used a prod to get the evil, scratchy creature off my car and march it back into the bush and whatever hellish portal it escaped from. The trucker then proceeds to double over in laughter as he helps me down and surveys the damage. So many scratches on the bonnet and glass. The trucker tells everyone that day and the next about saving me from the rabid beast. I am now both mocked and revered. I was tree planting in northern British Columbia. I was working on the same piece as another planter for about an hour. Then I heard a soft thumping sound. I looked up and saw an adult grizzly bear running towards the other planter, whose back was to the bear. I started running towards it, waving my arms and yelling. The bear stopped, turned towards me and stood on its hind legs. I stopped moving and was about 20 to 30 feet away from it. The bear stared at me for about 5 seconds. It felt like an eternity. Dropped back down, turned around and bolted back into the tree line. Saw 2 cubs with it that we weren't anywhere close to, so we figured that it was a mother teaching its cubs how to hunt. I had to sit down for a while after that, because my legs were shaking so bad. This isn't from me, but from my mate. Once on a school camp for 21 days in Alpine, Australia, we were forced to sleep alone for 48 hours. So at around 2 a.m. on the second night, I heard a shout from where he was sleeping. He told me the next morning that a kangaroo stole his hiking pack and that in a panic he threw a water jug at it. Lo and behold, the kangaroo regrouped after a short time and surrounded him in a circle. All he remembered were like 5 pairs of eyes staring back at him in the night. I have yet to ask him how he managed to fend them off. But yeah, that's Australia for you. I have a few good animal stories, but the scariest was getting charged by an angry bull shark. I was down in Florida with my family, and my dad, brother who was 11, and sister who was 6 were all decently far out hanging out when we spotted the shark. It was probably between 4 to 4.5 feet long. My dad and I went shoulder to shoulder with my siblings behind us and started quickly but calmly heading in. This thing must have charged us nearly half a dozen times, at or near full speed, and only broke off when it got within 10 to 15 feet. I don't know if you've ever seen a shark hunt at full speed, but they're significantly faster than I could ever sprint on land. The feeling was like we were in its world, and if it wants one of us, it's probably going to take one. So we finally get in, and the shark heads down the beach. I look down, and there's another family with a small girl in a life jacket out in the water. So I run down and yell to them, but they aren't listening. I figured that I'm bigger than it, and if it were going to attack me, it would've. So I start swimming out to them. I popped up about 15 feet from the girl with the dad on her other side, and the shark was right in between us. Without thinking about it, I jumped forward and slapped the water, and I think I spooked it. I jumped forward and grabbed the girl, which the dad who hadn't seen the shark didn't appreciate. I pointed it out and gave him back his daughter, and we got back in. He was incredibly thankful once he understood the situation. But yeah, sharks have barely changed in hundreds of millions of years. And that day, I truly appreciated exactly why. Like I said, if it had wanted to take me, I don't realistically think that the 4 of us could have actually stopped it. I was hunted by a big cat while camping. It started early in the day when my friend's dog started barking at the bushes near our campsite. We wrote it off as the paranoid little crap just being his paranoid little self. Let me tell you though, there were times that day that I could just feel something's eyes on me. At dusk, we came across some little animal bones, mostly small things like birds, but tried to write it off as being leftovers from a hawk's meals. I really wish we'd have taken it as a sign and just up and left right there. That night, we could hear something in the bushes. The dog went on full alert, and not in a don't mess with me kind of confident way, but like a, oh crap, we should really leave right now kind of way. All that my friend and I had between us and whatever was in those bushes was a thin tent, and at that point, it became very hard to accept the circumstances. You try to make a tent a fortress made of stone in your mind, because the reality of it becomes too much to bear. Eventually, we did come to terms with reality, and agreed that whatever was making that noise, we needed to do something about the situation, because a tent might not be enough to protect us. So my friend peeks out with a flashlight, and there they are, big eyes in the bushes glowing right back at us. I don't know if any of you had the experience of your blood running cold, but for an instant, I was so cold that it hurt. I don't know how long we stared into the bush, back at the eyes, but it got primal. There was no cognitive thought going on beside my base instinct to just stay dead still. My friend's dog eventually got up the courage to peer out with us, and yipped when it saw the eyes. And then boom, out it came, charging at our tent. It was the biggest tabby cat I ever saw, as big as a Maine Coon. I dang near peed myself as it scampered right past our tent. I never camped out in my friend's backyard again. At a lodging in Victoria Falls, Zimbabwe, a group of baboons walking across the garden, and I took some photos with my camera at the time with the flash on. It must have made the alpha baboon angry who was in charge of them, because he came storming after us and we all ran in the little house, and he was banging on the window trying to break in, it seemed. He had some scary big teeth. I was only around 12 years old at the time. My uncle was from Zimbabwe, so he had a bit of experience with them. When he noticed what was happening, he ran out and chased them away. I'm a geologist, and sometimes need to camp as part of my job. A couple of years ago, I had one such job. I spent 2 months north of Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, camping out of a tent with the other geologists that I work with. We were doing a pretty serious prospecting job. We were camping right next to a small lake, which we swam in to wash ourselves, wash our clothes, etc. Most nights we would hear wolves and foxes howling and screaming. We got used to that. Most nights we'd hear beavers slapping the water with their tails, or moose swimming in the lake, or walking through the brush. Almost every single morning we'd come out of our tent and see bear prints through the camp, coming right up to our tent and walking around. We were pretty good about keeping things clean. We'd store our food in airtight containers inside our truck, burn any garbage, do our business away from camp, etc. We had a small generator so we could charge our equipment like GPS, cameras, and laptops for movies, etc. It turns out black bears really like the smell of gasoline. We had a bunch of jerry cans that the bears kept trying to chew. A few had puncture holes in the handles. Our second to last night in camp, we had left our generator running. Forgot to turn it off and we were just going to let it out of fuel. I was sleeping in my cot in the tent, and something pushed against the back from outside of the tent. I was at the stage where you aren't sure if you're dreaming or not, and I wasn't able to move, so I just sat there and whatever animal kept pushing against the tent. I could hear it sniffing and grunting, and I eventually moved and asked my buddy if he could hear it too. He was also awake, and said that it had been there for a while. I was getting tired of it, so I made some loud noises and it eventually ran off. A little while later, we hear something walking around the tent again, this time going towards the generator. All of a sudden, the generator starts surging, as if it were running out of fuel. Then we hear a really loud noise, a squeal, and then it was as something was crashing through the bush running away from the tent. We take out our lights and check to see what had happened. Around our tent were more bear prints than I'd ever seen in one place. The extension cord coming from the generator had been chewed to heck, and the gas cap on the generator was all mangled. The bear was going after the fuel in the generator. It was one of the most uncomfortable and creepiest nights of my life. The amount of tracks around the tent was wild. There was definitely more than just one bear. It was a good thing that we were leaving the day after, since the bears were getting way too comfortable having us around. I've had a few scary animal encounters, but the only one with lasting effects is from the time that I had a run-in with a whale. I was 10 or 11 at the time and was on a school trip to the ocean. It was nice out, and if you bring a pack of children to water on a nice day, they will all go swimming. Being a fearless little crap and a strong swimmer, I went out pretty far into the water. Around this time, I'd begun having sight problems, so I needed glasses to see far away. I had taken them off so I could swim. I'm treading water and turn to look back to shore and see my classmates waving their arms around. I squint to see what the heck they're on about, and they're frantically waving and pointing my direction. Not putting two and two together, I wave back. Right about that time, a gray whale surfaces right next to me with a full blast exhale and gives me a curious once-over before diving back down. That was the calf. The mom was behind/beneath me. I obviously wasn't a threat, but I got a boop out of her just to make sure. I'm pretty sure that I set some speed record getting back to shore. I haven't swam in the ocean since, and have developed a crippling fear of deep water. When I was 12 or 13, my next door neighbors had this massive pit bull that was always kept chained up in their backyard. Now, when I say this thing was chained up, I don't mean with a standard dog leash type chain. I'm talking heavy-duty towing chain. They got it from a military family member who was being stationed overseas and couldn't keep it. This thing barked and growled constantly, and sounded like it wanted to kill anything that wasn't its own people. I saw it get away one time to chase some kid on a bike by jumping a 5-foot fence. Luckily, the kid had a big enough lead and the owners were out when it happened, and were able to get him back. I used to ride my motorcycle in the alley behind our houses pretty frequently, and had gotten used to the dog barking at me when I did it. I had ridden down to the end, about 6 or 7 houses down, and turned around when I see this dog bolting towards me, dragging about 5 feet of chain behind it. It had pulled apart that heavy-duty chain. I didn't know what to do, so I gunned it straight at the dog. That thing jumped up and hit me square on the chest, taking me off of the motorcycle. We rolled for a second. Then the dog jumped right onto my chest again while I was on the ground. It then attempted to lick me to death. After all the barking, growling, and warnings from the neighbors about how vicious he was, it turns out that he just wanted to play. I told the neighbors what happened, and they couldn't believe it. They thought that this vicious dog would be stuck in their backyard forever. After that, they took him out to socialize him more, and he calmed down, almost completely stopped barking, and would get excited whenever someone came to see him. My dad was a fish farmer in rural Tanzania, Africa. In his first month, he went hiking with some locals to get used to the area and the terrain. He was walking slightly ahead of the group and turned a corner and looked a leopard right in its face. He just stood there for a moment, not breaking eye contact with the huge cat in a fascinated trance. Eventually, the leopard turned and walked away. He then looked down to the other 2 locals he was hiking with and said in Swahili, "Leopard," and pointed around the corner where he'd just been. The 2 locals looked at each other for a second and ran down the mountain as fast as they could. Trekking through the Bolivian Amazon, everyone had told us to expect to not see a single animal, as most are so shy that they stay well away from humans. A lovely day walking, and totally satisfied by seeing some cool frogs, monkeys, bugs, etc. Our amazing guide, Ivan, an indigenous local who was so incredibly knowledgeable, suddenly halts and mimes for us to get down and be totally still, as close to a tree as we can. We hear this otherworldly clicking sound all around us, like a hollow wood block being rhythmically knocked, and suddenly 60 or so pecaries, Amazonian wild pigs, come charging through the forest on all sides. This may not sound too scary, but these pigs were ferocious, and only the night before we heard all about the guy from their village who was out on a pig hunt. They have a free pass to hunt them as they are a staple food. When the herd turned on the hunting party to defend themselves, they all climbed trees to escape, except the unlucky man who couldn't find one and got eaten alive by angry pigs. Needless to say, I totally crapped myself. That does not sound like a good way to die. We also had to wait for 20 minutes after they'd left us, as they release a hormone from an anal gland. It smelled like rancid pate, that when inhaled causes you to become confused. This clever defense mechanism is to stop pursuers. That may be why there is a legend that if you hunt pecaries after dark, they become spirits and disappear. I almost had a mountain lion take off my face. We were sitting in a parked car in the mountains, waiting for my grandparents to finish chatting to their friend. I rolled down the window for a bit for some airflow and turned to chat to my sister. I heard a big thunk and looked over, but my sister grabbed me and pulled me to her side of the vehicle. I just saw a massive paw with its claws out, swiping around where I was sitting. We screamed. My grandparents' friends pull out a BB gun and shot at the mountain lion. It took off running. My grandparents were completely unfazed. They said, "Yeah, these things happen. Luckily, you were in the car." Me and my girlfriend were in Kenya on a safari holiday, staying in a lakeside house, Joy Adamson's house, author famous for the book Born Free, where they adopt a lion cub, and we decided to go check out the lakeshore one evening. There was the ricketiest jetty in all of Africa, and I decided to walk out on it. I see some ripples moving across in front, and then they swept back towards the shore. A hippo and her calf come out of the water, all of a sudden moving towards the end of the jetty, where I need to get to safety. I decide to run for it before they block me in, past the two of them, shoving my girlfriend up the steps as they roar and give chase. Two guys fishing started chucking rocks at them to scare them off, but it only pushed them further up the steps towards us. Running into the house and shutting a glass door didn't give us much feeling of security, but sure enough, they turned and headed into the shrub. Got woken up later that night to an almighty grass-ripping sound. The same couple of hippos on the lawn, eating loud enough to wake us right outside our window. All part of the fun of the safari. Growing up on the Gulf Coast of Florida, I spent a lot of time fishing. By the time I was in high school, I was really into spearfishing and generally used a Hawaiian sling. It felt pretty awesome to have nothing but flippers, a bathing suit, a mask and a snorkel, and my spear out in the water. One day, after a pretty good haul with 4 to 5 fish hanging off of my rope, I see something pretty long in my peripheral. Thinking it might be a curious, read stupid, tarpon, I got excited. Turning around and aiming my spear, I see a good 5-foot-long barracuda staring right at me, maybe 10 feet away. For those of you who don't know, they swim very slowly and ominously, seeming to just float along with their big nasty teeth showing, but then attack lightning quick, not giving you any time to react. I've been in the water with sharks tons of times, and you learn pretty quick to respect but not really fear them. But these things are swimming evil torpedoes. Needless to say, I took the half-dead fish off my rope and pushed them in his direction and proceeded to get the ever-loving heck out of there. Last year, my brother and I drove to Alaska from New Jersey. A couple of weeks in, we stopped in Montana. Due to all the snow, lots of the trails we wanted to walk were closed. We'd been camping out of the Volvo to save money on rooms during the trip, and had found a place outside of a trailhead. It was closed, but we found on Google Maps that there was this lake a few miles up that we could go see. We had nothing else to do that day, so we started our trek. It was cold, and a lot further to the lake than my brother had originally thought. 5 miles into our walk, he had to bribe me with a blunt to make it to the lake. I was over it at that point, but little did I know things were about to get much worse. We made it to the lake, and we were both unimpressed and sort of bummed that we'd walk all that way for nothing. So we turned and began back down the mountain road. You could see miles ahead of yourselves on those roads. We made turns around a corner after a long stretch, and I felt my brother's hand on my chest, stopping me in my tracks. His eyes were fixed on something in the distance. I looked at what seemed like 2 deer. They were far away, so we stood and waited. No, much too big to be deer. Maybe a couple of moose? Terror washed over the both of us as one of the shapes stood up on its hind legs, confirming that we were thinking about but didn't want to say. That was a bear and her cub. I look at my brother, who'd been telling me about how bears can run up to 30 miles per hour earlier in the day, unsure about what to do. They were far away. We started to walk backwards to the corner that we'd just come around. Once we were completely around, we ran as fast as we could. Probably another half mile before we slowed, and then we found a bathroom area off to the side that was unlocked. We figured we'd wait there to see if the bears kept coming. If that happened, we'd have to hole up in the bathroom for God knows how long. Already exhausted from the previous miles walked, the running didn't help, and we still had miles to walk back. While we didn't see those bears again, I was pretty shaken up about it walking back to the car, in all honesty. First thing I did when I got to Alaska was buy a can of bear spray. My buddy and I were hiking through the brush in Algonquin Park one early autumn afternoon. We were maybe 5 kilometers from camp when we came upon a moose lunching in a bog about 50 to 70 meters away. The little bit of trail, moose or deer, not a ranger marker trail, we'd followed ended here. There was the narrow path we'd come along, thick tangled brush to one side, bog to the other, and a hill with a sheer face jutting up in front of us. And the time it's taken to look around the moose had silently halved the distance between us. So we opted for the hill. Climbing it was like a cartoon, all crumbly, muddy surfaces, with roots sticking out here and there to grab onto. My buddy is up ahead of me and just destroying everything he touches, showering me with dirt. I'm about 3.5 meters up. The moose is directly below me, and I'm holding on to a small group of springy roots. Panicked a little, then scrambled up the last couple of meters. We're all excited, like, haha, screw you, moose. And then we hear snapping twigs. The moose just walked through the tangle, as only a moose can do, and had started up the hill from the easy slope side. Crap. We booked it for a long while. Just as we thought we were safe again, we came across fresh bear dung. Like, still steaming fresh. We decided to take a dry riverbed as far as possible at that point, to be as noisy as possible. We made it back to camp after a long, circuitous route, right at sunset. Started dinner and laughing about the day, when the stupid moose appears at the edge of the lake, maybe 200 to 300 meters away. It started screaming the craziest noise ever and mashing its hooves on the rocky shore. It was insane. Then it just vanished. We were scared to go to sleep that night, in case he wasn't alone with us, but eventually I zonked out. That's when I realized my buddy talks in his sleep. I woke up to him freaking out due to a dream about wolves. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope that you enjoy the extra rain at the end. Get a good night's sleep, everyone, and I'll read to you in the next video. Bye-bye now.